Hello, how are y'all doing, guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Ionusen, and you guys are the Ionusaders. And in today's video, I'm gonna talk about which is the best podcast in the world. Now, let's mention some of the famous podcast in the world. First, we have to pick our nominations or nominees before we actually say which is the best. Uh, First, in the nominations, first we have Impulsive, the Logan Paul and Mike's. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, Logan Paul's podcast, Impulsive. For me personally, I think Impulsive is the best podcast in the world. And by the way, a weird flex, but I have watched more than 300. I have definitely watched more than 300 episodes of Impulsive. And I think I'm their most long lasting and most watched viewer of Impulsive. I watch every episode of Impulsive. I enjoy it. Some of the best podcasts, sorry, some of the best episodes have been created in Impulsive. So personally, I think Impulsive has to be the best podcast in the world. Uh, then then we have more nominations. We have the Full Send podcast. In the nominations, is if you don't know, the Full Send podcast is the Nelk Boys podcast. I've watched a few episodes of Full Send podcast. To be honest, pretty good podcast, not a bad podcast. Then we have the Joe Rogan's podcast. Watched a ton of Joe Rogan's podcast too. Amazing podcast. Joe Rogan's has amazing podcast. And then we have Raw Talk, Bradley Martin's podcast. I watched uh, I've watched a lot of Bradley Martin's podcast too. To be honest, I don't like Bradley Martin a lot, but I can discredit him, dude. His podcast is pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I may not like Bradley Martin a lot, but his podcast Raw Talk is pretty good. Then what more nominations we have? Oh, how can I forget the new outstanding podcast BS with Jake Paul. I think I've watched almost every BS with Jake Paul's episode. Fun fact, I just watched uh, the newest magician BS with Jake Paul's episode. To be honest, it was a pretty good episode. Pretty cool. The dude kept magic. The dude could read mind. The dude read mind of Jake and his friends, Jake Paul and his friends' mind. Pretty fun podcast. So BS with Jake Paul is also in nominations. Then we have what more podcast we have in the nomination? Okay, we have the two girls of Arnold. Sorry, two daughters of uh Sylvester Stallone. I think they can also be in the nominations. Then who else can be in the nomination? Theo Bond's podcast can be in nomination. Oh, Sean O'Malley's podcast is also in the nomination. Oh, how can I forget that? George Janko. George Janko's podcast is also pretty famous. Obviously, George Janko's podcast went viral after the Andrew Tate Andrew Tate podcast episode. George Janko's um, video got viral. Sorry, George Janko's podcast got viral. So yeah, I mean George Janko's podcast is pretty good too. I've watched a lot of George Janko's episodes too. Anyways, if you know me, you would know that I watch a lot of podcasts because when you are bored, what what is the thing you can do? You watch podcasts. Podcast is long. It can cure your boredom sometimes. I personally think the Impulsive podcast is the best podcast out there. because with Logan Paul has a lot of great personality. George Janko, who was on Impulsive, had a great personality. Mike Malak, the ex-drug addict, obviously the famous guy that was like that tells everybody that he was a drug addict. I watch his vlogs too. Uh, Also, is a pretty good personality person, Mike Malak, and yeah, I would say I would say Impulsive is the best podcast out there. Comment down below what do you think is the best podcast in the scene? Do you think Impulsive is the best? Do you think Raw Talk, Full Send? Who is the best? I think Impulsive is the best podcast because like the fun I had watching Impulsive is crazy. With the nomination was Sidecast, the Sideman podcast. Uh, to be honest, I had never watched a single episode of Sideman podcast or Sidecast because for some reason you need to pay to watch a Sidecast. Like, who is gonna pay to watch a fucking podcast that's dumb as fuck? Even like I am broke, but even if I had money, I would still not fucking. Even if I was a millionaire, don't just have money. Even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't fucking buy like sidecast. Like, why I'm gonna pay for a fucking podcast? Like, shut the fuck up. Yeah, I mean these are the best podcast nominations. I think Impulsive is the best, and the next one is Joe Rogan's podcast. It's second best. I think then we have probably the BS to Jake Paul, amazing podcast. Then we have probably the George Yanko's podcast. Then we have the Two Daughters of Sylvester Stone. Then we have Full Sun. Then we have Raw Talk. Then we have a lot of podcasts. And nowadays, everybody and their mom has a podcast. It's so funny. Like, oh, actually, I disagree. I think my podcast is the best podcast in the world. I have a podcast. If you don't know, I upload my podcast, solo podcast, in this channel, and yeah, nobody watches my podcast. But I think personally, I think my podcast is the best. But if okay, I'm joking. My podcast is not the best. So Impulsive and my podcast also should be in the nominations because I talk about cool things, motherfucker. Anyways, yeah. Uh, I think these are the podcast nomination, and podcast is an amazing source of content. It's like almost like the reading books of YouTube. It's you can learn a lot from podcast. I've learned a lot from podcast, like different people's perspective, how they think, how they talk, how is their personality. You can pretty much learn a lot of fucking things with podcast and yeah, with podcast and this kind of thing. To be honest, it's kind of depressing in my room because the where my room is. I have a very small room. I live in Dhaka city, the capital of Bangladesh. I have a pretty small room. It's almost all, there's no space in my room. I have a really cozy room to be honest. But it's very dark in here, so I'm kind of feeling depressed. It's very dark. Oh, don't why you don't light the on? I don't know. Why you don't start the lights? I don't fucking know. And there's a building next to me, so it's more dark. Yeah, it is pretty much it. So, yeah, Impulsive is the best podcast out there, and I guess thanks for watching this video. Watch my old videos, watch my new videos. I make cool videos like this. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and press the bell icon to see more videos like this. Share this video with your friends, family, and comment down below which is your favorite podcast. And stay healthy, stay happy. And thanks for watching this video about my podcast recommendation and comment down below. Do you agree with them or not? Okay, let's wait for this video to turn exactly 10 minutes. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bye. 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 It's done 10 minutes. The fuck? Yeah. Bye.